Welcome to truly scary shifting reality and parallel universe stories. Smash like and subscribe to tread the thin line between reality and the surreal. Let's begin our eerie expedition. The silent town. I woke up abruptly, my heart hammering against my ribcage. The first thing I noticed was the silence, a deafening, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow up the world. I sat up in bed, straining my ears for any sound, the chirping of morning birds, the distant hum of traffic, the creak of the old wooden house as it settled. But there was nothing. The absence of sound was so profound it felt like a physical presence, pressing in on me from all sides. I glanced around my bedroom, taking in the familiar yet strangely altered surroundings. The furniture was in its usual place, but everything seemed just a fraction out of alignment, as though someone had meticulously copied my room from memory but hadn't quite gotten it right. I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the window, pulling back the curtain. The street outside was as I remembered, lined with the same neat row of houses, but devoid of any signs of life. The stillness was unsettling, a stark contrast to the usual early morning activity. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was my town, but something was horribly wrong. I dressed quickly, slipping into my favorite jeans and a sweater before heading downstairs. The house felt colder than usual, the air heavy and still. As I moved through the kitchen, I noticed small discrepancies that heightened my sense of unease. The coffee maker's clock was off by a few minutes, the family photo on the wall was slightly crooked, and the familiar creak on the third floorboard from the door was missing. Determined to find some semblance of normalcy, I stepped outside, the cold morning air biting at my skin. As I walked down the silent street, the sense of wrongness grew. The flowers in Mrs. Davis's garden were wilted, their vibrant colors dulled, and the usually neat lawns looked neglected. I spotted Megan, my best friend, walking towards me. Relief flooded through me at the sight of her familiar face. "Megan," I called out, waving. She looked up, but her response was strange, an empty, almost mechanical wave of her hand. As she got closer, I saw her eyes. They were dull, lifeless, lacking the spark that usually animated them. "Megan, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and concern. She stared at me for a moment before speaking in a flat, monotonous tone. "Everything is fine, Emily. Just fine." The words sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't Megan. This wasn't right. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I turned and hurried towards Mr. Thompson's house. He had lived in the neighborhood for decades and was a wealth of local knowledge. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be him. I reached his front porch and knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like an eternity before he opened it. Mr. Thompson stood there looking at me with a blank expression. The warm, twinkling eyes that usually greeted me were now cold and distant. "Mr. Thompson, something's wrong. The town, the people, they're not acting right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He simply nodded and stepped aside, silently inviting me in. The inside of his house felt just as wrong as the outside world. The furniture was slightly out of place, and there was a layer of dust on everything, as if the house had been abandoned for weeks. I followed him into the living room, my anxiety growing with each step. "Sit," he said curtly, motioning to a chair. Hesitantly, I complied, feeling his gaze weigh heavily on me. He sat across from me, his eyes never leaving my face. "Emily, you need to listen carefully. Things are not as they seem. You have to find a way out." His words were cryptic, but before I could ask for more, he abruptly stood up and walked away, leaving me alone in the eerie silence of the room. I felt a rising sense of panic and desperation. What had happened to my town? Why was everything so frighteningly wrong? Determined to get to the bottom of it, I stood up and walked over to one of the dusty windows. As I peered out, my own reflection caught my eye, but there was something unsettling about it. My reflection wasn't quite mimicking my movements. It was a moment behind, like a delayed echo, and its eyes, my eyes, were filled with a malevolent intent. The Silent Town Part 2. I stared at my reflection, my breath catching in my throat. The malevolent look in my own eyes was unmistakable. Heart pounding, I stepped away from the window, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. I left Mr. Thompson's house, my mind reeling. It felt like every step I took echoed with a sinister presence. My own reflection was watching me, haunting me from every reflective surface. I hurried down the eerily silent street, every shadow seemingly whispering secrets to me. As I passed the small grocery store, a hint of movement caught my eye. In the window I glimpsed a shadowy figure, its form vague and indistinct. It stood in sharp contrast to the unnaturally stiff movements of the townspeople. I approached cautiously, feeling the icy grip of fear tighten around my heart. "Hello?" I called out softly, my voice barely breaking the oppressive silence. The figure didn't respond, but continued to mimic my movements in a slow, deliberate manner. It felt like a distorted reflection of myself, evoking a deep sense of unease. Backing away, I resolved to go back to my house. Reaching what should have been the comfort of my home, I was instead greeted by the same alien strangeness that permeated the town. Each room, every piece of furniture, all felt slightly off. It was my home, but it wasn't. I moved to the mirror in the hallway. The compulsion to look was irresistible, even though I dreaded what I might see. Leaning in close, I saw my reflection. A perfect replica, but with those unsettlingly cold eyes following me intently, moving just a fraction too late. It was as if the mirror was a portal to another world, showing me this malevolent version of myself. I spotted something odd, wedged between the frame and the wall, a small crumpled piece of paper. I yanked it free and unfolded it, revealing a hurried, jagged scrawl. "This is their world. Escape before you become one of them." The warning sent a chill down my spine. The urgency in the note made it clear that time was running out. I needed to find more clues, more pieces of this twisted puzzle. My eyes swept the home, looking for anything out of place. Back in my bedroom, I rifled through drawers and checked behind picture frames. Finally, under the bed, I discovered another crumpled note, identical in paper and writing. "Find the mirror. Shatter it." A sense of purpose began to replace my fear. I had to shatter the mirror, destroy the portal that was trapping me in this nightmare. Gathering my courage, I headed for the small antique store at the edge of town. I remembered seeing a large, ornate mirror there once, and it seemed like the best place to start. The store, much like everything else, was plunged into silence. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim light as I entered, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I made my way past the rows of faded furniture and cobweb-covered trinkets until I found it, the mirror, standing tall and imposing in the back corner. Its surface gleamed ominously, reflecting a distorted image of the dimly lit room. I stepped closer, feeling the oppressive weight of many eyes upon me. As I stood before the mirror, the reflection shifted slightly. There I was, but my doppelganger stood just behind my image, its eyes filled with malice and a knowing smile curling its lips. I hesitated for a moment, dread clawing at my resolve, but with a deep breath, I raised a nearby chair, preparing to strike. My doppelganger's smile widened, almost as if it was daring me to follow through. With a fierce shout, I swung the chair down at the mirror. The sound of shattering glass tore through the suffocating silence, and the reflection fractured into 1,000 glittering shards. The room seemed to ripple, reality distorting around me. Shadows twisted and contorted, whispering in excitement, as if the very fabric of this world was coming undone. Summoning all my strength, I stepped through the shattered frame, hoping beyond hope that this would lead me back to my reality. The Silent Town, Part 3. For a moment, the world around me was a swirling maelstrom of jagged glass and darkness, the air thick with a cacophony of whispers. I fought to keep my eyes open, straining to see through the distortion. As I took a step forward, the chaos began to subside, the shards of glass falling away to reveal a familiar yet desperately longed-for sight. I was back in my bedroom. The comforting noises of early morning traffic and birds singing filtered through the open window. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the vibrant, chaotic sounds of life. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with a lingering sense of unease. I looked around, noting that everything was back in its rightful place, yet I couldn't shake the memory of the eerie distortions. I stepped into the hallway, my legs unsteady, and moved to the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face. As the water trickled down my skin, grounding me back to reality, I dared to look up at the bathroom mirror. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. a fleeting shadow behind my reflection, gone in an instant, but enough to send ice through my veins. Was it just my imagination? Or had my doppelganger managed to slip through with me? The thought gnawed at my mind. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here, not knowing if part of that parallel universe had followed me back. Determined to assure myself that everything was indeed normal, I decided to visit Megan. I left my house and walked briskly down the familiar street, still reveling in each everyday sound I had taken for granted. Reaching Megan's house, I knocked on the door with a mix of apprehension and hope. She opened it, her face lighting up with her usual warm smile. "Emily, you look like you've seen a ghost. You okay?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Her eyes, lively and bright, were a stark contrast to the lifeless orbs I'd seen before. Relief flooded through me, and I gave a shaky laugh. "Yeah, just had one of those weird dreams, you know?" She gave me a puzzled look but quickly shrugged it off, inviting me in. We chatted about mundane things, the comfort of normalcy wrapping around me like a blanket. For a moment, I felt safe and reassured that I was truly home. That evening, as I settled down to sleep, I felt a strange sense of peace. The nightmare seemed far behind me. But as I lay in the twilight between wakefulness and dreams, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Sitting up, I saw it on my bedroom wall, the shadow of my doppelganger, just outside the window, watching me with that same malevolent intent. Panic surged through me. I jumped out of bed and raced to the window, ready to confront the shadow, but there was nothing there, just the sway of the trees in the night breeze. I returned to bed, heart still pounding. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the fear remained. Did I truly escape, or had part of that sinister world infiltrated my reality? As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't escape the sensation of eyes watching me from the darkness. The silent town might have let me go, but a part of it lingered. A haunting reminder that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare wasn't over.
I awoke to a silence so profound, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Groggy, I blinked at the ceiling, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. Something was wrong. I listened intently for the usual morning sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of traffic, but there was nothing. An utter and complete silence enveloped the room, pressing in on me from all sides. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. "Michael?" I called out, hoping for the reassuring sound of my husband's voice. My words seemed to be swallowed by the heavy stillness. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my feet meeting the cold floor. Every step I took felt unnatural, like I was moving through a dense fog. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I opened the bedroom door and ventured into the hallway. The house looked exactly the same, pictures on the wall, furniture in place, but it felt off. I glanced into our living room. Michael's favorite recliner was empty, his morning coffee untouched on the side table. Anxiety gnawed at my stomach. Where could he be? I made my way to the front door, my pulse quickening. Maybe I could find him outside, or perhaps our neighbors might know something. As soon as I opened the door, the unnatural silence followed me into the neighborhood. The street, usually bustling with morning activity, was now deserted and unnervingly still. No cars, no people, not even a breeze to rustle the leaves on the trees. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice echoed hollowly, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. Panic surged through me as I hurried across the street to Mrs. Thompson's house. Her garden was in full bloom, yet everything seemed dull, lifeless. I knocked on the door, harder and harder with each passing moment of silence. No answer. I tried the doorknob, surprised to find it unlocked. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside. "Mrs. Thompson?" I called out, my voice trembling. The interior was pristine, as if frozen in a tableau. I could smell her signature lavender scent faintly lingering in the air, but there was no sign of her. It was as if the house was waiting for its occupants to return, yet I instinctively knew they never would. Feeling a rising sense of dread, I left the house and hurried back home. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number. No signal. In desperation, I tried calling my sister, then my parents. Nothing. The realization hit me like a freight train. Whatever was affecting this place was all-encompassing. I needed answers. Driven by a blend of fear and determination, I decided to head to the town square. Maybe there, in the heart of the town, I could find some clue as to what had happened. Walking through the empty streets was like navigating a ghost town. Every familiar landmark was eerily silent and devoid of life. As I approached the town square, I was startled to see a figure standing alone near the fountain. "Jack?" I called out, recognizing the man as an old high school friend. He turned around, his expression mirroring the confusion and fear I felt. "Sarah, what's going on? Where is everyone?" His voice was shaky, betraying his calm exterior. "I don't know," I replied, my own voice faltering. "Everything's just wrong. It's like the world has stopped." Jack nodded, looking around nervously. "I woke up to this silence and haven't seen a single soul. It's like they all just vanished." "Have you seen Michael?" I asked, the urgent note in my voice unmistakable. Jack shook his head. "No one, just this emptiness." He paused before adding in a hushed tone, "Do you remember those old stories about our town? The ones about the mirrors?" I furrowed my brow. "Mirrors?" Jack glanced around as if the very air could betray him before leaning in. "There were stories about a mirror that could transport you to another world. I always thought they were just ghost tales. Until now." My mind raced as I tried to process what he was saying. Was it possible? Could those old tales hold a grain of truth? The silence around us seemed to grow heavier, with each passing second, adding to the weight of our uncertainty. "We need to find out what's going on," I said finally. "Maybe there are answers in those old stories." Jack nodded, his urgency matching mine. "Agreed. We should stick together. Hopefully we can uncover what's behind this and find a way back to normal." As we left the town square, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow darting into an alleyway. I looked back, but it was gone, leaving only the unsettling feeling that we were being watched. We walked through the deserted streets, the weight of the silence bearing down on us. Every creak of a door or rustle of leaves made me jump. Jack led the way, his eyes constantly darting around. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, shadowed by something unseen. We turned down an alleyway, the narrow passage lined with tall, weathered buildings. It was darker here, the shadows deeper and more oppressive. Halfway down the alley, a small figure emerged from the darkness, making me gasp. "Hello?" The voice was soft, almost a whisper. A young girl stepped into the dim light, her eyes wide and fearful. She was clutching a worn teddy bear tightly to her chest. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Are you here to stop the Watchers?" "The Watchers?" Jack echoed, his brows furrowing. "Who are they?" Emma looked around nervously before stepping closer. "They watch from the shadows. They took everyone away. You have to be careful." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Do you know where they took them?" Emma shook her head, hugging her teddy bear tighter. "No, but they don't like it when people ask questions. You have to be quiet or they'll come for you too." Jack and I exchanged a worried glance. There was something unsettlingly knowing in Emma's eyes, something far beyond her years. "Emma, do you know anything about a mirror?" I asked, my voice hushed. Her eyes widened further. "The mirror is where it started. It shows things, not like they are, but how they want to be." Before we could ask more, Emma looked over her shoulder, fear flashing across her face. "I have to go. Be careful." She disappeared into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. We continued down the alley, Emma's warning playing on a loop in my mind. The antique shop loomed ahead, its facade covered in peeling paint and dust-smeared windows. It was the last place I remembered visiting before everything went wrong. Pushing the door open, we were greeted by a dim, musty interior. Dust motes floated in the weak light streaming through the dirty windows. Shelves were lined with trinkets, old books, and forgotten relics from another time. "There's something about this place," Jack murmured. "It feels heavy." I nodded in agreement. As we ventured further inside, something drew me to the back of the shop where a large, ornate mirror stood. Its surface was foggy, as if it had been untouched for ages. "This is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is the mirror." We approached it cautiously. As I peered into the reflective surface, my heart skipped a beat. My reflection looked back at me, but there was something off. Her eyes held a sinister gleam, and her smile was a mocking, twisted version of my own. Jack stepped beside me, his reflection equally disturbing. What the hell is this? Suddenly, the reflections began to move on their own. My doppelganger reached out, her hand pressing against the glass, and I felt an icy chill creep up my spine. They want to replace us, I whispered, horror dawning on me. They want to take our place in our world. Before I could react, a loud crash echoed through the shop. Jack and I spun around to see shelves toppling over, trinkets and books scattering across the floor. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow darker, shifting and writhing like living entities. "We need to get out of here," Jack said urgently, grabbing my arm. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. My reflection's grin widened, and her eyes glittered with malicious glee. "No," I said firmly. "This mirror is the key. We can't leave it here." Jack hesitated, but nodded. We had to find a way to stop whatever dark force was at work. With a final glance at the malevolent reflections, we turned and hurried out of the shop, determined to uncover the truth and reclaim our reality. We fled the antique shop, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The streets outside seemed darker, the shadows deeper and more ominous. Every step echoed off the tall buildings around us, amplifying our fear. The oppressive silence had grown heavier, now accompanied by a faint whispering that seemed to seep from the very walls of the town. "Did you hear that?" Jack asked, his voice trembling. "Yeah," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's like the shadows are alive." We turned a corner and suddenly found ourselves back in the town square. The fountain stood eerily still, its usual cheerful splashing now a distant memory. The whispering grew louder, and the shadows seemed to shift and dance, forming grotesque shapes. "I don't think we're alone," I said, gripping Jack's arm tightly. From the shadows emerged twisted figures, vague humanoid shapes with eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They moved slowly, purposefully, their whispers growing into an unintelligible cacophony. The watchers, they were real. "Run!" Jack shouted, but it was too late. The shadows enveloped us, cold tendrils wrapping around our ankles, pulling us down. I kicked and screamed, but the grip was relentless, dragging me into the darkness. Everything became a blur of fear and panic. The shadows whispered my name, over and over, each time louder and more insistent. I felt my consciousness slipping, the world around me fading into nothingness. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shadows released me. I found myself lying on the cold ground, Jack beside me, gasping for breath. The town square was empty again, the shadows retreating to their corners, but their presence lingered. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, helping me to my feet. "Barely," I replied, my body trembling. "But we can't stop now. We need to end this." We stumbled our way back to the antique shop, the whispering shadows following us, a constant reminder of the danger we faced. The mirror loomed large and menacing, its surface now clear, reflecting our terrified expressions. "This is it," I said, swallowing hard. "We have to confront them here." With trembling hands, I reached out to the mirror. My reflection mimicked my movements, her eyes glittering with malevolence. As my fingers touched the surface, the glass seemed to ripple like water, and the room grew colder. My doppelganger pressed her hand against mine from the other side, a mocking smile curling her lips. "Welcome," she whispered, her voice an eerie echo of my own. "You're ours now." I felt an unbearable pull, like being sucked into a vortex. For a moment, it felt as if I was losing myself, becoming one with the shadowy figure. My vision darkened, and despair gripped my heart. "No!" I screamed, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. With a forceful shove, I pushed away from the mirror, breaking the contact. The room trembled, the glass cracking with a deafening sound. My doppelganger's smile faltered, her eyes widening in shock and anger. Jack grabbed a nearby bookend and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, and a blinding light filled the room. The watchers' whispers turned into wails of agony, their dark forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. Then silence. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air felt lighter, almost normal. I turned to Jack, who was staring at the fragments of the mirror with relief and disbelief. "Did we do it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at the edges of my mind. "But are we really back?" We cautiously stepped out of the shop. The town was still quiet, but the suffocating tension seemed to have lifted. Birds chirped in the distance, a small but reassuring sign of normalcy. As we walked home, the unease remained, an unwanted companion whispering doubt into my thoughts. Was it truly over, or was this just another layer of the nightmare? The thought haunted me as I crossed the threshold into my house, my heart yearning for the world I once knew. In the days that followed, life seemed to return to normal, but the echo of that otherworldly silence never truly left me. I would wake in the night, heart racing, convinced I heard whispers in the darkness. One morning, while getting ready, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For just a fleeting moment, I saw it again, the malevolent gleam, the mocking smile. The watchers might be gone, but their shadows lingered. And somewhere, in the fragments of that shattered mirror, I knew my doppelganger was still watching, waiting for another chance to take my place.
Have you ever woken up and felt something was profoundly wrong? You think it's a dream, only to find it's a waking nightmare. This is my story of being trapped in an echo of my world, where silence is just the surface of unspeakable horrors. It started on what should have been an ordinary morning. My eyes fluttered open to the dim glow of the sunrise filtering through the curtains. The first sensation that struck me was the oppressive silence. My alarm hadn't gone off, the usual hum of the city was non-existent, and even the comforting creak of the old building settling was absent. An uneasy feeling gnawed at my gut. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. Maybe I had somehow slept through my alarm. Grabbing my phone, I saw that it was dead. Strange, since I always charged it overnight. Tossing it aside, I decided to proceed with my morning routine. Maybe some coffee would clear my foggy mind. As I moved through my apartment, the silence followed me, wrapping around me like a thick, suffocating blanket. Flipping the light switch did nothing. No hum of electricity, no click of the bulb, just more silence. The kitchen was cast in shadows, the only light coming from the early morning sun struggling to pierce through the dirty windows. I opened the fridge to grab the milk, but the usually cold blast of air was missing. The milk was warm, like it had been left out overnight. Frowning, I shut the fridge door and turned to face the windows, half expecting to see some sign of life outside. But the city that should have been bustling with early morning traffic and pedestrians was eerily still. Cars were parked, some with doors ajar, but not a single person in sight. My building, usually alive with the sounds of neighbors starting their days, was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. My heart began to race as I hurried back to my bedroom to get dressed. Each step felt amplified in the unnatural quiet. Grabbing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, I dressed quickly and slipped on my leather jacket. I needed to get out to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. Stepping out into the hallway, the silence persisted. I knocked on my neighbor's door, but there was no answer. My mind raced, cycling through possibilities. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? A power outage? Why the complete lack of sound? I decided to check the streets. Maybe someone outside could give me answers. As I pushed open the building's front door, a chilling breeze cut through me. Like the rest of the city, the street was empty. Shops remained closed, cars abandoned, traffic lights flickering in a monotonous dance. I walked down the deserted streets, my eyes scanning for any sign of life. That's when I saw him, a shadowy figure standing at the end of the block. Relief washed over me, and I almost laughed in my anxious state. I wasn't alone. I approached him, my steps quickening. "Hey, can you tell me what's going on?" He turned slowly, his face obscured by shadows despite the sunlight. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the silence clearly. "You shouldn't be here. Where is everyone? What's happening?" My voice sounded strange, even to me, like it didn't belong in this soundless world. The figure tilted his head as if contemplating my questions. "This isn't your world anymore. You've shifted, and he is coming." With those cryptic words, he began to fade, dissolving into the air like mist. Panic surged through me. "Wait, who's coming? How do I get back?" But he was gone, leaving me with the weight of his warning and a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was something much more sinister. As I wandered the streets in search of answers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence wasn't just a lack of noise. It was something alive, something malicious. My once familiar city had transformed into a labyrinth of eerie emptiness, and I was too deep inside to find my way out. The city felt like a twisted carnival of the familiar and the grotesque. Buildings stood where they always had, yet their shapes seemed slightly off, as though an unseen hand had distorted them. Anxiety gnawed at me, threatening to overwhelm my rational thought. That's when I stumbled upon the antique shop. It sat on a corner I should have known well, yet I had never seen it before. Its sign, echoes of the past, swung listlessly in the still air. A shiver ran down my spine as I pushed open the old wooden door, a bell jangling softly, the first sound I had heard all day. For a fleeting moment, the silence was broken, only to settle back with renewed intensity. The shop was dimly lit, filled with the scent of dust and forgotten memories. Shelves were stacked with antiquities, rusted trinkets, faded photographs, and ancient tomes. My eyes were drawn to the back of the shop where a large, ornate mirror stood. Unlike everything else in this muted nightmare, it seemed to shimmer with vitality. I approached, and as I drew closer, my own reflection came into focus. But something was wrong. My reflection didn't just mirror my movements. It stayed one step ahead, a sinister shadow of myself. It smiled, an unsettling grin that sent ice through my veins. I raised my hand, and my reflection did the same, but the timing was off. Instinctively, I reached out to touch the glass. The smooth surface felt cold under my fingers, yet my reflection's hand was warm. Panic welled up as the figure in the mirror grasped my wrist, its grip like iron. My own face leered back at me with a malevolence I had never known. Before I could pull away, the reflection yanked me towards the mirror with inhuman strength. The world around me blurred and twisted as I was pulled through the glass, landing hard on the other side. I was now in a distorted version of the antique shop, everything warped and darker, the air colder. I stood and looked back at the mirror. The world I had left behind was now just a blurry backdrop, and my reflection, the sinister shadow, stood on the other side, free in my world. It turned and walked away, leaving me trapped. I pounded on the glass, screaming, but no sound emerged. My surroundings began to change, shifting and melting into a twisted version of my apartment. The walls seemed to close in, the familiar objects now ominous in their displacement. Panic surged through me, but then something caught my eye, a stack of old papers on my desk, yellowed with age. Grasping at straws, I read through the documents. They were research notes, scattered and cryptic, speaking of parallel universes and the concept of echoes. This town was built as a cage to trap those who discovered too much about the mysteries of reality. The mannequins, the silence, the eerie familiarity, all mechanisms to maintain the balance and ensure no one escaped. And the doppelgängers, a necessary evil to keep the equilibrium. My own shadow now lived my life, free to exist in a world I could never return to. The horror of it sank in, tearing at my sanity. Desperation clawed at me as I scrambled to find another way out, but the labyrinth of twisted versions of my apartment seemed endless. Every door led back to the same sinister space. Every turn mocked my plight. That's when I saw them, the shadowy figures, now fully revealed as twisted, hollowed versions of people I once knew. Their eyes were voids, their movements distorted and jerky. They began to close in on me, whispering truths I couldn't comprehend, filling the air with a suffocating presence. My strength waned as I fought to push them back, their cold, clammy hands grabbing at me. Finally, in a last-ditch effort, I broke free and ran, only to find myself back in front of the mirror, now shattered, the pieces reflecting countless versions of my terror-stricken face. I fell to my knees, surrounded by the fragments of my own reality. The truth was clear. There was no escape. The silent town, the eerily familiar streets, the cryptic warnings, they were all part of an unending torment designed to keep me caged. As the shadowy figures closed in one final time, I felt a strange calm wash over me. My last thought was not of fear, but of resignation. I had become a part of the echo, an eternal prisoner in a world where silence was the loudest scream. The twisted version of my apartment grew increasingly hostile, as if it were alive and determined to break me. I needed to find a way out, a way back to my world. My doppelganger might have taken my place, but I couldn't surrender to this macabre reality without a fight. Pushing through the oppressive silence, I spotted a faint glow emanating from beneath a door I had not noticed before. The hope of finding an exit fueled my steps as I approached. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and stepped inside. The room was illuminated by a sickly, unnatural light. Shelves lined the walls, filled with artifacts and documents similar to the ones I had seen earlier. But these were older, more decayed, the text nearly illegible. In the center of the room stood a table with a large black book, its cover adorned with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift. Compelled by a mix of desperation and curiosity, I opened the book. Its pages whispered as I turned them, but no sound reached my ears. The words were a garbled mess, yet their meaning seeped into my mind. I understood. They spoke of the town's true nature, a creation designed to trap those who tampered with the fabric of realities. I hadn't noticed the shadowy figures until it was too late. They emerged from the walls, crawling towards me like predatory insects. Panic rose again, but this time I felt a strange resolve. I wasn't going to let myself be consumed by this place. The book hinted at a last, desperate measure, a ritual to sever my connection to this echo of reality. Frantically, I gathered the necessary items from the shelves, an ancient dagger, a vial of dark liquid, and a shard of the shattered mirror. As the figures closed in, I began the incantation, my voice echoing silently in the room. The shadows recoiled momentarily, giving me just enough time to complete the ritual. I plunged the dagger into my palm, letting the blood mix with the dark liquid and the mirror shard. The symbols on the book's pages glowed ominously, absorbing the mixture. A blinding light consumed the room. Pain shot through every fiber of my being as reality twisted and contorted around me. The shadowy figures screamed silently, their forms disintegrating in the light. I felt my consciousness being torn away, flung across an infinite void. When I awoke, I was back in my apartment, my real apartment. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the familiar hum of the city. I staggered to my feet, my head throbbing with the remnants of the ordeal. For a moment, I thought I had finally escaped. But dread quickly filled my heart. The reflection in the window showed my doppelganger smirking back at me, standing just behind me. I wheeled around, but the room was empty. My reflection had reverted to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't over. My phone buzzed, a message from Lisa asking if I was okay. Meeting up with Lisa and Mark, I recounted my harrowing experience. They listened, their faces reflecting concern and disbelief. But I could sense it, the subtle changes in their behavior, the way their eyes seemed to flicker with something dark and unspoken. The realization hit me like a cold wave. I might have returned, but the echoes of the other world had followed. My friends, my life, nothing was truly the same. The silence had bled into this reality, a constant reminder of the horror I had escaped from, yet remained forever bound to. It became clear that my ordeal hadn't ended. It had merely evolved. The boundaries of realities had blurred, and now I lived in a world where the echoes of that silent town would forever haunt my every step. My doppelganger was out there, lurking in the periphery of reflection, waiting for the moment to reclaim its stolen place. I end this account with a warning. Should you ever find your world eerily silent, do not seek the source. Do not scratch the surface, for beneath lies an endless labyrinth of terror. Some echoes are best left unheard, and once you step into their world, they'll never let you go. The silence watches, always. Part 1. I always imagined mirrors as gateways, portals to another world. I never thought that stepping through one would turn my life into a waking nightmare. The decision to move had been hasty, a desperate attempt to shake off the shadows of a broken relationship and a stagnant career. My new apartment, a quaint pre-war building on a quiet street, seemed to offer the fresh start I craved. Its age added charm, the kind that promised stories whispered through creaky floorboards and rustling curtains. Unpacking was a slow process. Each box revealed pieces of a life I was trying to rebuild. That's when I found the mirror. Nestled in the hallway, it stood tall and ornate, its frame intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed to dance in the dim light. The previous tenant had left it behind, and something about it drew me in. The mirror captivated me. At first glance, it seemed like any other antique piece. But as I cleaned it, wiping away years of dust and grime, I felt a strange pull. My reflection stared back at me, eyes seemingly deeper than the glass they were trapped behind. One evening after a particularly long day, I stood before it, lost in thought. My fingers traced the edge of the frame, and as I reached the center, my hand slipped through the surface. Panic froze my heart. It was as if I had dipped my fingers into cold, liquid glass. Curiosity overrode fear. I extended my hand further, feeling a bizarre, almost gel-like resistance before I decided to step through completely. The sensation was disorienting, a brief flash of darkness followed by the chilling realization that I was no longer in my apartment. The room looked identical, yet wrong. The air felt heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang that stung my nostrils. Shadows clung to corners and surfaces were duller, like everything was wrapped in a thin veil of soot. The silence was deafening, amplifying the sound of my own breathing. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection was there, for a moment a perfect mimicry. Then it smiled. A fraction of a second after my own lips had tightened in confusion. I lifted my hand, and the reflection lagged, raising its arms slightly delayed. I tried to shake the eerie feeling and began exploring this alternate version of my home. Every step felt like walking through someone else's dream. Objects were where they should be, but appeared distorted, as if viewed through a veil. The photos on the wall had faces that seemed to watch me with vacant expressions. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. In the living room, I was sitting on the couch, watching TV. My double looked up and greeted me with a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome," he said, his voice unnervingly familiar. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, backing away. "I'm you," he replied, standing up. "Or rather, the better version of you." As if on cue, he began to mimic my every move, but always with a slight delay that was unnervingly noticeable. We stood facing each other, a distorted mirror image, until his eyes flickered with a malevolent glint. "You've seen things you shouldn't have," he whispered, stepping closer. "And now, you'll never leave." Startled, I stumbled backward, eyes darting towards the mirror. It no longer seemed like a doorway, but a trap, its surface gleaming with a promise of return, tainted by the threat of being pulled back in. My double laughed softly, the sound resonating in the oppressive silence as if mocking my fear. From that moment I knew I had to find my way back, but more importantly, I had to understand what I was dealing with. This was no mere reflection. This was a calculated shadow, intent on replacing me. My mirror self was stronger and seemed to be relishing my confusion and fear. Desperation clawed at me. As I edged closer to the mirror, planning a hasty retreat, my doppelganger blocked my path with uncanny speed. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, voice dripping with mock sincerity. I pushed past him, feeling his cold touch like needles on my skin. I had to escape, had to get back to the world where shadows didn't move, and reflections remained in their rightful place. The alternate apartments seemed to pulse with a sinister life of its own as I reached the mirror, bracing myself for the sickening sensation of crossing back. Falling through the glass, I landed hard on the floor of my original apartment, gasping for breath. The oppressive air lifted immediately, but so did the brief comfort. My reflection stood calmly within the mirror, watching with that same delayed smile, a silent reminder that my nightmare was far from over. Part 2. Days turned into a blurred mixture of fear and paranoia. Sleep eluded me as I kept catching glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye. I couldn't shake the feeling that my doppelganger was always watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Desperate for help, I reached out to Emma. She was the only person I trusted enough to share my absurd and terrifying ordeal. The irony wasn't lost on me, seeking comfort from the very person I fled from. "David, you look terrible," Emma said, concern etched on her face as she opened the door to her office. "What's going on?" I struggled to find the right words. "You remember the old apartment I moved into?" She nodded, guiding me to sit. "Yeah, the one with the antique mirror, right? That mirror, I think it's some kind of portal." Emma's brow furrowed, skepticism creeping in. "A portal?" With a deep breath, I recounted everything. The mirror, the doppelganger, the alternate world. Her expression shifted from skepticism to worry. "I know it sounds insane, but Emma, I'm not crazy," I pleaded. "I need your help." Emma's investigative instincts kicked in. "All right, let's find out what we can. I'll look into the mirror's history. Maybe there's something we're missing." From there, I hurried to Patrick's apartment next. He opened the door, towering above me with his usual calm demeanor. "David, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's up?" "Patrick, I need your help," I began, voice shaking. "It's about the mirror in my apartment. It's not just a mirror." Literally and figuratively dragged inside by my story, Patrick frowned. "You're not making much sense." I summarized the nightmare I was living, expecting disbelief. To my surprise, Patrick listened with grave seriousness, perhaps picking up on the desperation in my voice. "Okay, let's say I believe you. What do you need from me?" "I need someone who can fight back if things go south," I admitted. "I need you to be there when this thing, my doppelganger, comes for me." Patrick nodded without hesitation. "You got it, man. Just call me when you need me." Armed with Emma's determination and Patrick's loyalty, I felt a fleeting sense of hope. That hope was dashed when I returned home and found my doppelganger had already begun his terrifying game. The moment I stepped into the apartment, I knew something was wrong. Objects were moved, lights flickered sporadically, and a soft, sinister whispering filled the air. "Did you really think you could bring help?" the whisper seemed to say, mocking my every effort. The TV flickered on and off, displaying static intercut with brief, haunting images of my own face twisted in agony. I could feel my sanity slipping further away with every second. Sleep deprived and on edge, I called Emma, knowing she was my lifeline of rationality. "David, I found something," she said, her voice crackling through the phone. "The mirror. It's part of a series of cursed objects. It's rumored to connect parallel worlds, and the consequences of using it can be disastrous." "Tell me something I don't know," I whispered, eyes darting around the room. "But there's more," Emma continued. "Every case I found had one thing in common. The person who attempted to switch places with their doppelganger never made it back completely, sanity intact." Her words lingered in the air like the grim finality of a death sentence. I hung up, feeling more isolated than ever. The whispers grew louder, and I knew I had no choice but to confront the thing haunting me. It always started the same way. Shadows stretching too far, reflections lagging, and that knowing smile. My doppelganger was playing with me, pushing me closer to the edge. I needed to end this. Patrick arrived, ready to confront whatever awaited us. We stood side by side, staring at the mirror as it gleamed ominously. Suddenly, my doppelganger stepped through, no longer confined to his alternate world. He moved silently, his movements calculated and precise. "I've waited long enough," he snarled, eyes flashing with malevolence. "This world will be mine." Patrick lunged at him, but my doppelganger moved with inhuman speed, blocking his attack effortlessly. The room became a battlefield, furniture overturned, and the air filled with the sounds of struggle. Desperate, I grabbed a broken piece of glass, slashing at my doppelganger. The shard connected, and he recoiled, momentarily weakened. I seized the chance, pushing him towards the mirror with all my strength. With a chilling laugh, he fell back through the glass, disappearing into the other side. My apartment was left in disarray, the oppressive tension lifting slightly. But I knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. His parting words echoed in my mind as the mirror shimmered with a residual malevolence. I fell to my knees, breathing heavily. Patrick helped me to my feet, his eyes reflecting the same fear I felt. "We need to destroy that thing," he said, voice resolute. But deep down, I knew that simply breaking the mirror wouldn't free me from the nightmare. The darkness had already seeped into my reality, and there was no escaping it now. Part 3. Patrick and I stood, staring at the mirror, its surface now a silent gate to the terror I had barely escaped. But there was no time for hesitation. We knew that destroying the mirror might sever the connection, but it might also trap us forever in an endless cycle of these horrors. The room felt like it was closing in on us, every shadow an uncertain threat. My reflection slowly faded back into place, smiling at me with that unnerving delay. I met its gaze, feeling a surge of anger and determination. "We need to end this," I said, my voice edged with desperation, once and for all. Patrick nodded, gripping a heavy iron rod he had fetched from his apartment. "One way or another," he agreed. I positioned myself in front of the mirror, feeling a cold sweat trickling down my back. The reflection grinned wider, as if knowing what was to come. With a guttural yell, Patrick swung the iron rod. The mirror shattered with a deafening crash, shards of glass scattering like malevolent stars across the floor. A gust of icy wind whipped through the room, extinguishing lights and plunging us into darkness. Then came the change. The reflection didn't disappear. Instead, it seemed to smear and stretch across the remaining fragments of the mirror, like ink blooming in water. I watched in horror as my doppelganger began to claw its way back into our world, emerging from the frame's fractured remains. "You can't get rid of me that easily," it hissed, its eyes now glowing like embers. Without thinking, I grabbed the iron rod from Patrick, attacking my doppelganger with a reckless fury. Each blow seemed to have an effect, weakening its hold on reality. But with every strike, it retaliated, slashing at me with glass-like claws, drawing blood. Pain blurred the edges of my vision, but I refused to yield. I could hear Patrick shouting, see him grappling with the monster's limbs, buying me precious time. With a final, desperate effort, I drove the rod through the heart of my doppelganger, pinning it against the remnants of the mirror. A gut-wrenching scream filled the room as the doppelganger's body began to contort and dissolve, sucked back into the shattered portal. The remaining glass fragments shimmered, then fell silent, their surface devoid of any reflection. The adrenaline drained from me, leaving my body racked with the pain of my injuries. Patrick helped me up, both of us panting, bloodied, and bruised. The apartment was quiet, the oppressive presence seemingly gone. But unease gnawed at my mind. I stumbled into the bathroom and stared at myself in the small, unbroken mirror above the sink. My reflection moved in perfect synchrony, a tired and beaten version of myself. No delayed smiles, no sinister spark in the eyes, just me. Days passed. I cleaned up, repairing what I could, but the sense of normalcy was hollow. The mirror was gone, but I felt like some part of me was lost with it. Emma continued her research, offering a listening ear and cautious optimism. Patrick visited more often, his presence a solid reminder of the battle we had fought. Yet, subtle changes lingered. The air felt different. Shoes left exactly where I hadn't placed them, lights flickering ever so slightly. The whispers were gone, but the silence was oppressive, heavy with the weight of something waiting, watching. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in twilight's eerie glow, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. My heart skipped a beat. The delay was back, a fraction of a second, but unmistakable. Fear clenched my gut as I approached the glass, hand trembling. My reflection met my gaze and smiled, a slow, knowing grin. The darkness wasn't gone. It had seeped into my reality, a silent watcher behind every reflection. I tore my eyes away, refusing to acknowledge the truth. I walked through my apartment, touching every surface, verifying every shadow, but the feeling persisted. I was back in my world, or so I thought. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred. My reflection might not be plotting actively, but it was there, waiting for me to slip, for a crack to appear, for another chance to pull me back into that nightmarish realm. I understood now. The battle wasn't over. It would never be over. The mirror, the doppelganger, they were just the beginning. I would always live with a fractured sense of reality, forever haunted by the specter of what waited on the other side of the glass. Reflections of horror. On the night the storm hit, I stepped through a mirror and into a nightmare. Reflections lied, and my eyes deceived me. My doppelganger wasn't just my shadow. He was the harbinger of my doom. This is the story of how I lost my life to the man in the mirror. My name is James Thompson, and I trace my descent into madness back to a cold, stormy evening. My grandmother's old house, a Gothic relic, groaned under the weight of the wind and rain. The storm had knocked out the power, leaving only the flickering glow of the fireplace and the occasional flash of lightning to guide my movements. As a historian, I've always been surrounded by the past. My new home was a trove of cherished artifacts and ancient relics, the most captivating of which was a large, ornate mirror, an antique passed down through generations. It stood tall and imposing in the dim light, its gilded frame shimmering like something out of a dream. I found myself inexplicably drawn to it, its surface reflecting the room with an almost eerie precision. Tiny imperfections in the glass gave my reflection a slight tinge of distortion, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The mirror seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering secrets that danced on the edge of my consciousness. I approached it, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The closer I got, the more the air around me seemed to thicken, carrying a weight of untold centuries. Lost in the mirror's depths, I stumbled, my hand instinctively reaching out to steady myself against its cold, unforgiving surface. That's when it happened. A sudden lurch, a drop in my stomach as though the ground had fallen away beneath me. I blinked, disoriented, and found myself standing in what appeared to be the same room, but something was off. The colors were muted, shadows deeper. The reflection of the flickering firelight seemed wrong. At first, I tried to rationalize the sensation, chalking it up to a trick of the light or my own imagination. But as I looked closer, I noticed the photographs on the mantelpiece. They were family portraits, or should have been. Instead of familiar faces, strangers stared back at me from the frames, their eyes hollow and unseeing. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in my surroundings, feeling as though I were being watched. I spun around, scanning the room for anything out of place. The furniture was the same, yet slightly askew. Books leaned at odd angles on the shelves, and the antique clock ticked with an unnatural rhythm. I forced myself to breathe deeply, urging calm to settle my fraying nerves. I had to understand what was happening. The mirror was the key, of that I was certain. Just then, a movement caught my eye. I turned towards the mirror and froze. Reflected in the glass was a figure, my exact image, mimicking my every move. But there was something sinister in his eyes, a malevolent gleam that sent chills down my spine. With a sense of mounting dread, I realized he was more than just a reflection. This doppelganger wasn't confined to the glass. He was here, in this room, plotting something unthinkable. Panic surged through me as the horrifying implications sank in. My doppelganger wasn't just mimicking me, he was poised to replace me. The storm outside raged on, but the real tempest was within. In my isolated world, shadows danced and whispered, and I knew, deep in my soul, that my life was no longer my own. Trapped in this distorted version of my home, every nerve in my body screamed for escape, but I knew I needed answers first. With the eerie silence pressing down on me, I began to search the house meticulously, hoping to find some clue about the nature of this twisted reality and the malevolent mirror. In the study, I noticed a peculiar detail I'd never seen before, a hidden compartment in the corner of the wall. It was almost as if the room was shifting itself to reveal secrets. My hands trembled as I pried the compartment open to find an old, tattered journal. Dust and age had yellowed its pages, but the words inside were surprisingly clear, as if written by a meticulous and desperate hand. The journal belonged to someone named Lawrence Hill, and its contents were chilling. Lawrence had, not unlike me, encountered the doppelganger phenomenon through the same mirror. He described a harrowing battle for his identity, culminating in his ultimate failure to escape. Each entry dripped with paranoia and despair, revealing a pattern that I now found myself entwined in. The final pages hinted at a ritual, a last-ditch effort to expel the doppelganger and reclaim his life. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I felt a desperate flicker of hope. My mission was clear. I had to perform this ritual and confront my double. My first step was to gather the items Lawrence mentioned, symbols of the past and personal items imbued with emotional significance. It wasn't easy. The dark, oppressive atmosphere of the parallel world made every moment feel like a battle against unseen forces. During my search, I encountered him again, my doppelganger. His presence was becoming more invasive, appearing unexpectedly and skulking in the corners of my vision. He was no longer content to simply mimic me. He mocked me, his movements fluid and filled with malice. His silent taunts wore at my sanity. Desperate for some semblance of normalcy, I sought out familiar faces. I found my best friend, Michael, in the parallel universe, his usually warm aura curtained by an eerie unease. Michael's initial reaction was one of disbelief, but as I explained the situation, his expression shifted from skepticism to concern. He agreed to help, though his alternate self seemed more wary, adding an unsettling layer to our interaction. Emily's presence was equally haunting. She was the epitome of collected calm, her meticulous nature undistorted. She listened intently as I relayed the journal's contents and my experiences. Her analytical mind was my anchor amidst this madness. It was her suggestion to incorporate old artifacts from the house into the ritual that gave me direction. We worked together, Michael, Emily, and I, setting up the ritual space in the study. Strange symbols adorned the floor, drawn in chalk that seemed to shimmer ominously. I scattered personal items around the symbols, each one a fragment of my past meant to anchor me to my rightful reality. I could feel the tension building, the air thick with both anticipation and dread. The time had come. With Michael and Emily by my side, I began to recite the incantations from the journal, hoping against hope that Lawrence's final effort wouldn't be in vain. The room darkened, the only light coming from the trembling candle flames. As the ritual neared completion, I felt an oppressive weight bear down upon us. A sudden cold draft blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, I sensed him before I saw him. My doppelganger emerged from the shadows, his eyes gleaming with intent. This was it, the moment of truth. Armed with the knowledge and support of my friends, I faced my menacing reflection, ready to reclaim my life. The room seemed to contract, drawing all its darkness inward as my doppelganger stepped forward. The firelight flared and dimmed erratically, casting monstrous shadows that twisted and danced around us. The tension was palpable, a suffocating shroud that threatened to crush us under its weight. The air rippled with an unseen force as I took a step toward my double, my voice steady but my heart pounding with fear. "This is my life. You can't have it." He smirked, a cruel, mocking gesture, and I felt a shudder run down my spine. With a swift, almost predatory motion, he lunged at me, and we clashed in a surreal, nightmarish struggle. The mirror's powers seemed to transmute the space around us, warping reality into a kaleidoscope of horror. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, the symbols and artifacts around us glowing with an unnatural, pulsating light. The incantations echoed in my mind, guiding my actions as I pushed back against the relentless force of my doppelganger. His strength was horrifying, each blow landing with an impact that felt like a freight train. Michael and Emily circled us, their eyes wide with terror and determination. Michael tried to intervene, but the mirror's magic repelled him, sending him crashing into the bookshelf. Emily's voice, clear and commanding, called out another line from the journal, urging me to hold on. My body ached, every movement a testament to the violent battle for my very soul. For a moment, I thought I saw fear in my doppelganger's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a determined glare. He paused, a wicked grin spreading across his face, and in that moment I felt a change within me, a cold numbness spreading from my core. Time seemed to slow, the room spinning around us in a slow-motion blur. I looked down, seeing my hands start to shimmer, becoming translucent. My doppelganger's eyes flashed with triumph, and the truth slammed into me with brutal clarity. I was losing. I was becoming the reflection. "No," I screamed, a guttural, raw shout of defiance. I lunged one last time, driven by the primal instinct to survive. Our forms interlocked, the world around us shattering into countless refracted images. And then with a sudden, explosive release, it was over. I found myself standing alone, the room eerily quiet. My breath ragged. I looked around, recognizing the familiar yet warped surroundings of my home. A sob caught in my throat as I realized what had happened. I turned to the mirror, and there he was, living, breathing, triumphant. He gave me a final mocking salute before walking away, disappearing into the depths of my life. I was left behind, a mere reflection, forever trapped in the gilded prison of the antique mirror. The echo of my despair filled the silent room as I screamed, banging my translucent hands against the unforgiving glass. Michael and Emily rushed to my side, their faces distorted by the mirror's cruel trickery. They called out to me, their voices muffled and distant, unable to reach through the barrier that now separated us. In the heartbreaking quiet that followed, I understood with crystal clarity what the journal had failed to convey. I had been the reflection all along. My real self had already replaced me, stepping through the mirror back into the world that was once mine. The mirror's surface shimmered ominously, the room returning to its deceptive calm. I was now part of its sinister cycle, an eternal prisoner, watching helplessly as my doppelganger lived the life that was rightfully mine. As the twilight hours passed, the shadows around me began to whisper once more, readying themselves for their next victim. The cycle continued, the mirror's hunger unending, and I, the lost soul behind the glass, could do nothing but watch in silent, agonizing despair.